Okay friends, to get started on our job, first step is to make sure you disconnect the negative battery terminal. Next, we're going to continue on to removing our air intake. We've got a couple clamps. Let's go ahead and loosen those. Set this aside. Now that that's out of the way, we're going to grab onto this little green tab, give it a little tug, and then slide this off of here. Set this aside. Now let's get this off of here. Next, we're going to squeeze this clamp, get this out of the way. Let's continue on by removing the rest of the mounting bolts for this. There's going to be 2 on the passenger side and then 1 left on the driver's side. Let's get them out of here. Set this aside. Just going to go ahead and cover this up. Make sure it's as sealed as possible. And we're going to try to spray out any of the debris that's inside this localized area, essentially anything up here. And then of course we'll give a little bit of air underneath there. Just try to blow out any of the debris. After we've done that, let's continue on by lifting up on this red tab right here. That's the lock. Squeeze on the center and then lift this up. Check it for any funny colors and set it aside. Next, we're going to remove the 4 mounting bolts that hold the throttle body to the intake itself. This bracket right here is going to come off as well. Once we lift this up, you're going to find that there's another set of wiring on this side over here. It's much easier to get to after the throttle body's off. At this point, I can lift this up and we can see our next wiring harness. Lift our red tab, press that center button and draw this off. Let's continue on to removing this line right here. On the passenger side, you're going to find that there's 2 little tabs. Squeeze those together, and then you can press this up. That unlocks it. Lift it right up and off of there. Let's get this line off of here as well. On the back side, there's going to be a little tab you can grab with your finger. Slide it. That's going to release the lock. We'll lift this up as well. Set it aside. Now we're just going to take out this bolt that holds this bracket on the back of the manifold. Now we're going to continue on by using a serpentine belt removal tool, or of course you can use a 1/2-inch drive ratchet. Go right inside the tensioner hole here, press down on that, and then we'll relieve the belt. It's a good idea to pay attention to the direction and of course the root of your belt in case of course it falls off of any of the pulleys. We'll leave this just like this and move along to removing the alternator. To start removing the alternator, I'm going to push on the tab that's located right behind here and lift up on that. After that, I'll grab onto this cover, set that aside. Remove this nut, get the power wire off of here. Let's set these wires aside. The next thing we're going to do is get this bracket out of the way. You're going to find that there's 3 10mm headed bolts, and then of course there's going to be 1 stud here. Out of the way. Let's continue on to loosening these 2 lower bolts that hold the alternator. Those bolts you don't have to remove completely because the bottom of the alternator is slotted. Let's get this out of the way. The next thing we want to do is disconnect our fuel injector harnesses. Just squeeze the tab, draw this right off. Do the same to all 4 on the passenger side and of course the 4 on the driver's side. Once we have all the fuel injectors disconnected, let's continue on by removing this cover. Underneath there, you're going to find that there's a Schrader valve. Essentially, if you were to push down on that, it's going to release the pressure from the fuel lines. So I'm just going to use a little rag, kind of put it around the area, hopefully try to catch it, and of course, watch your eyes. All right, I have minimal pressure in there. That's good. I'm just going to put that cover back on so I don't lose it. You're going to find that there's 4 8mm headed bolts, 2 on the driver's side and 2 over on the passenger side. Remove them all. The next thing we're going to do is remove our fuel line from the fuel rail. Let's give this connector a spin. At this point, I'm going to use a small pocket screwdriver. I'm going to come in between this area right here, try to separate the 2. I'll lift up on that tab. I'm just going to squeeze these 2 ears together and then push. That's going to release the lock. It's still locked on. Nope. There we are. Carefully set that aside. If you happen to have some sort of cover, it's a good idea to try to put it over this line. That's going to help prevent fuel from pouring out of there. Slide it right on there. Now at this point, we need to pop our fuel rail off of the actual intake itself. To do that, I'm just going to use something that I can pry with. I'm going to get underneath this ear and then just try to gently lift up on this. That's going to separate the fuel injector from the intake. There we are. Let's grab onto that fuel rail, lift it up and out of here, and set it aside. Now the next thing that we need to do is remove our intake. To do that, you're going to find that there's going to be 5 mounting bolts along the passenger side and another 5 over on the driver's side. Let's remove them all. Now that we have all the bolts out of there, before we go ahead and remove the intake, let's just hit this with some more air and just get any of the debris out of the way. And right along the side, and of course along the other side as well. All right, now it's going to be time to go ahead and lift up the intake from the engine. Just pay special attention to the areas where the intake's going to connect onto it, because of course that's going to leave open ports. If anything falls inside there, you could cause catastrophic damage to your engine. Just going to give this a light bonk. Okay. Let's go ahead and remove these 2 bolts to get this off of here. Let's go ahead and lift up on our intake here. Try to slide it out of here. I'm just going to reach behind here. There's going to be 2 securing points that hold the wires to the back of the intake. Let's go ahead and pop those off. And then there's going to be 1 hose with a clamp. Squeeze the clamp and draw off the hose. There's our intake, friends. Okay, friends, now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and grab the gaskets. We'll set these aside. I always like to replace the gaskets. The next thing we're going to want to do is continue on with a vacuum, and if you have any debris inside the belly of your engine here, obviously you want to get that out of there. Also, up along these ports, you want to make sure that you get off any dirt and debris from along there, but be careful not to get anything inside of the ports. So now we have a nice clear view of our knock sensor. Obviously there's 2 of them in here. It's a good time to replace them both at the same time. We're going to follow the knock sensor wire, come up to where it connects into the wiring harness, disconnect this. At this point we can remove this 10mm headed bolt and remove the knock sensor. There it is, friends. Now it's going to be time to install our brand new knock sensor. We of course have our bolt. I'll come right here. I'm going to start in the bolt, and then I'll just snug it up. After that, I'll torque it to the manufacturer's specifications, which is 177 inch-pounds. Now let's attach our connector. Listen for a click, give it a nice tug, make sure it doesn't separate. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is take a nice razor blade or a scraper of some sort, and we're going to carefully just kind of scrape along the edge here and try to pull it away from the hole. You don't want to go into this hole right here. Just kind of get away all this crud that's built up on here, so when we put on our brand new gasket, it's going to seal perfectly. Okay, at this point, this looks pretty great. I can see all along all the areas where the gasket's going to ride. I don't have any buildup. I did the other side as well. Both look great. So let's go ahead and grab that intake and take a look at the bottom. Okay, let's carefully turn this over so we can see the bottom side. Just keep in mind that there's going to be some oil that sits inside the belly of this, so as we continuously flip it over, there's probably going to be a little bit that makes its way to the ground. Now we're just going to take our nice flat razor blade and clean up the areas on the bottom of the intake where the gasket's going to ride. All right, so I've done both sides of this at this point. What I'm going to do next is just try to get out the majority of the oil that's in here, and that's going to be done very simply by just kind of leaning this on its side and then allowing the oil to make its way out. All right, let's just clean off that oily mess now and grab those new gaskets. So I've got my brand new gaskets, and what I want to do is I want to take one of them, and you're going to notice that they have tabs. Those tabs need to fit inside these mounting holes that come along the manifold itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully line this up, make sure that all my holes are corresponding, and then as they are, Just go ahead and press them right in there. That's going to hold this to the manifold for me. Okay, real quick before we go ahead and put this intake back into the truck, I wanted to show you the backside. This is going to be the area that's located nearest to the firewall, or the area between the engine compartment and the passenger compartment. Here's the two studs that we removed that wiring harness from. We just kind of pulled it off. So when we go to put it back together, you need to make sure you re-secure it to this. Other than that, you're going to have a vacuum line that goes to this right here, and that's going to lead up to the vacuum booster. If you forget to reconnect this in, well, you're just really not going to have very good brakes. Keep that in mind. Let's get this in. Now back over at the engine, a couple things that I want you to take a look at. These two black clips are where those studs are going to go. So of course you just press those right on. And also for the hose, check to make sure it's not dry and brittle, it's clear of debris, and of course if you have something that's going to be able to lock on and squeeze the clamp while we do our installation, that's going to be much easier. Just carefully slide this down in here. And grab that hose, get it onto the little piton, and then we'll release the clamp. Okay. Got that hose connected on there. You want to make sure as we go that any debris that happens to fall off does not fall into that hole. Let's just go ahead and clear that away before we set this right down and on. Put that down on there. Now that this is set down, let's go ahead and put on those clips that hold the wiring harness. There's one. There we are. There's both. While I'm back here, I'm just going to do a quick double feel to make sure that the hose is definitely still on. Like I said before, if it falls off, you're going to have a vacuum leak, and that comes right up here to this vacuum booster. Now, if you're not replacing your intake manifold bolts, it's a good idea to make sure you at least clean up the threads, if not the heads as well. I like to do it with a nice wire wheel. We'll get them cleaned up, and then we'll continue. Let's go ahead and start in all of our bolts, and then we'll snug them up and torque them to manufacturer's specifications. Now that I have all those started in, we're going to continue on by snugging them up, and when we do this, we want to start with the two center bolts. So I'm going to go right here, then over there. As I move along, I'll go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, just like that. So now we're going to need to torque these down, and we're going to do this in two stages. Essentially, we're going to go around one time at 3.6 foot-pounds or 43 inch-pounds. And then after that, we're going to go around and continue on by tightening it to the second torque spec. I'm going to start in the center like I did before, and then we'll, of course, follow the same sequence. Now it's going to be time for our second pass. To do that, you want to torque these to 89 inch-pounds or 7.4 foot-pounds. All right, those are all torqued. Now the next thing that we need to do is take our fuel rail over to a nice bench, because we're going to go ahead and get these gaskets off of here. You're going to find that these are rubber O-rings. It's always a good idea to go ahead and replace them, but in case you aren't, just give them a nice little squeeze and a stretch. Make sure that they're clean and they're not cracked in any way. I'm going to set this aside because we have new ones. Now we're just going to clean this area right along here where the gasket's supposed to ride, and then just this area right up along there. That's where the fuel is going to come out of. Make sure there's no debris. Take your brand new gasket. We're just going to go ahead and slide this right on over there. Perfect. That's sitting right inside the groove along here. Typically, it's a good idea to replace both, but since we haven't actually removed this one and there isn't any issue, I'm just going to move along to doing all the rest that I can see. Now back over at the truck, what we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of carburetor cleaner, and we're going to go ahead and spray down these O-rings so that they'll be nice and lubricated so we can push them into the intake. Just going to slide this so they all line up. I can see my bolt holes are lined up. Make sure you don't have anything in the way of where the fuel injectors are going to go in. Give them a nice little loving bonk. And then start in all of your bolts, then torque them to 89 inch-pounds. Now that we have those all torqued, let's continue on by plugging in our fuel injectors. I always like to make sure I don't see any funny colors along the way. Make sure you hear a click, give them a nice tug. The last thing you want is one of these things falling off. Let's go ahead and connect in our line. Make sure you completely lock it in, of course. Give it a nice tug. Perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and install our short screw on this bracket back here. We'll start this screw in, we'll snug it up, and then we'll torque it to 89 inch-pounds. Now let's reconnect our hose. Just going to open this up, slide it down, make sure you lock it in. Now it's going to be time to get our PCV tube on here. You want to make sure the gasket, of course, is clean and in good condition. Let's go ahead and slide that so it's lined up. Start in both of your screws, and then we'll tighten them to 53 inch-pounds. Now let's put on the PCV tube. Goes right here. You just always want to lift up, make sure it's completely secured. You don't want it to pop off. At this point, what we're going to do is carefully grab this gasket out of here. It's always a good idea to make sure that you replace these gaskets as with any other gasket. If you can't for some reason, just go ahead and give it a nice stretch and make sure that it's not ripped or torn in any way, and it's definitely not stiff. I've got a nice new one, so I'm just going to carefully place this in here. Make sure that it's completely seated all the way around. You want to make sure that you get a perfect seal. Now it's going to be time to install our throttle body. You want to make sure that the bottom area where the seal is going to go is nice and clean. This one's new, obviously. At this point, we're going to make sure we connect in the driver's side connector. It's going to be easiest this way. Make sure that you lock it in completely. You don't want this to fall off. Carefully set this down onto your intake. We're going to take this little damper. This goes in the front with 2 bolts. Let's start these in. Put in the 2 rears. We'll snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 89 inch-pounds. Let's connect in that throttle body. Next, we're going to have to torque these bolts in 2 sequences. First, we're going to torque them to 80 inch-pounds, and then we're going to add an additional 90 degrees after we're done. So now that I've torqued that to the proper 80 inch-pounds, we're going to continue on by adding our next 90 degrees, which is essentially just basically turning it from 6 o'clock where I am over towards this way. That's pretty close. I'll continue on by doing the same to all. Next, we're going to continue on to putting on this little spider-looking thing. Let's put this right up on the top. Set it so it's flush. Let's go ahead and put in all of our bolts. We're going to do the 2 along the rear and then the 1 on the passenger side front. Now let's go ahead and torque these 3 to 89 inch-pounds. Now let's get this piece back on here. Snug this up, torque it to 89 inch-pounds as well. Now let's get this connected back on here as well. Go ahead and grab that little tab, slide it right on there, release it, and of course, make sure it's secured. Now it's going to be time to get our alternator back on here. Let's go ahead and level this on. Now when it comes time to install the bracket, you want to have it so it's like this. This bent area is going to be on the passenger side. And of course, when you have your bolts, the one that looks more like a stud is going to be on the passenger side as well. That one goes right on here. Once they're all started, start with the lower bolts, snug them up. Now let's torque those to 18 foot-pounds. Now let's snug these up. Now let's torque these to 89 inch-pounds. Before we continue on to putting on the belt, let's just clean off the pulleys. And of course the belt. Slide this right up on here. After you remove your tool, you need to double check all of your pulleys. You want to check the ones that are going to have the grooves to make sure the belt's completely seated on them. And of course, make sure that the backing's sitting flush on all of the smooth pulleys as well. Check them all before you start your truck. Okay, so now it's going to be time to reconnect in our wiring. Before we can go ahead and do that though, there's a couple things to pay attention to. You of course have the connection point that's going to be located on the alternator. You want to make sure that's nice and clean and clear of any debris. And then of course if you were to look at the wires themselves, well, that might look great. But then you go ahead and turn it over and you look and you can see that you won't have a very good connection. This is going to be very important to make sure that you get current to your battery from your alternator. If you have a poor connection, you're not going to be able to charge your battery. Let's go ahead and get this connected now that we've got it cleaned up. We'll snug this up and then we'll torque it to 150 inch-pounds. Let's secure that. And then of course, make sure we cover it as well. Let's continue on by putting in our wire. And of course, securing this as well. All right, friends, now it's going to be time to get this air intake installed back on here. Just going to push this so it's on there. Put on both sides. You want to make sure that they're completely flush with where they need to be, and then we'll snug them up. It's time to reconnect our negative battery terminal. Just make sure you have it all the way down, and then of course secure it. Okay friends, so it's all put back together. At this point what you want to do is start up the vehicle and then you're going to come out here and listen to it. You want to listen for any funny noises such as a ticking or even a hissing noise. If you hear anything like that, make sure you turn off your engine. Other than that, make sure you don't have a check engine light. If you don't, take it for a road test.